Drew Thomas Hendricks here. I'm the host of the Legends Behind the Craft podcast. On this show, I talk with leaders in the wine and craft beverage industry. Before we get on with the show, we've got to have a brief sponsor message. Today's episode is sponsored by Barrels Ahead. Barrels Ahead, we help the wine and craft industry scale their businesses through authentic content. Go to barrelsahead.com today to learn more. On the last show, I talked with Brandon Amoroso, founder of Electric Marketing. Brandon's got an incredible story. He founded Electric while in college, and in the space of 2 years, he grew his agency from 2 to 50 people and was recently acquired by Drinks. And we talked about the new Shopify platform dedicated to the alcohol industry. If you haven't listened to that episode, be sure to give it a listen. Today, I am super excited to talk with Jill Osur. Jill is the CEO of Teneral Cellars. Welcome to the show, Jill.
Thanks for having me, Drew.
Oh, thank you so much for being on. Glad we could connect here. So, Jill, tell us a little bit about yourself and Teneral Cellars before we dive in.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Thank you. I mean, about me or about Teneral Cellars?
Oh, it's your choice. Let's find out about you first.
Start about you.
How'd you get started?
About me. Well, I was an avid consumer. And actually, when I came up to play softball at Berkeley in 1985 and so close to Napa, I was just enamored with that. And then I got involved in politics and started out doing fundraising and advance work. And every great event I went to, there was wine on the table. And I just loved how wine connected people. And so I put it on my vision board early on in my career that I really wanted to be in the wine industry. I took a couple of side steps before that. I have 3 amazing young adult children, and I worked at Special Olympics for 15 years, which I'd always wanted to do as an athlete. But I was doing fundraising there and cause marketing, and I always incorporated some great wine into my events. I had a couple of winery owners on my board, so it just was natural. And then I realized that it was time for me to really take that leap after the '08 crash and find an avenue to really do what I love and love what I do, and got into the wine industry in like late 2013 or so, but got it on the distribution side first. But that was interesting because like you'd have great success building a brand, and then they'd walk into your office and say, "Hey, thanks so much for building our brand. We're going to be leaving you now. We're going to go over to Southern or Glazers or whoever the big boys were." And I realized we had no control over that. So we actually had a brand called Micah Cellars that we had built to about 10,000 cases, and he had hated the business side of the business. And so we bought that brand in 2015 and then literally did research on every AVA in California, and El Dorado County just kept screaming at us because of the quality of the dirt. There's no water issues. I mean, people don't realize the last time we had 7 years of drought, El Dorado County owns its own federal water rights. So it was literally selling water to other counties, and the dirt's equally as good as Napa. And Marco Capelli, who was working at Swanson at the time, actually helped put El Dorado County on the map with that statement. But there was also no production restrictions. So we went up there, we started a company, had multiple successful brands, multiple successful tasting rooms. But for me, it was really once COVID hit, and I was working at home like so many of us do or were at the time. It was also following the murders of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd, and the news cycles were consumed with the civil unrest in this country. And so I just was sitting there saying, what am I doing as a leader in the wine industry to be part of the solutions that I want to see in the world? Because I was one of 4 executive team members. I was a major owner in this company. But as I was sitting there, I was realizing I had become very tamed in an industry that is steeped in tradition and dominated by men. And that's just a fact. But when people say, Jill, tamed, no way. Because I was a collegiate athlete. I was a catcher at Cal. I have to use my voice to be successful at my position. I was brought up in a Jewish family and was taught tikkun olam, which is to repair the world and to leave it better than you found it. But before you repair the world, you have to repair your community, and before your community, your family. So being on the front line of civil and racial and social justice issues, that's not new to me. But somehow I had completely lost my voice and was leaving the best part of myself at the door on most days. And while that was sad, the saddest part was that my company was missing out on my brilliance. And when I say brilliance, it's really showing up in alignment and integrity with your highest, most authentic self. So as I was at home, I was like looking at my own industry, and I'm like, God, there's only 10% female winemakers, 0.1% Black winemakers, men and women. Many female sommeliers are still making 70 cents on the dollar to their male counterparts. And yes, while there are women in tasting rooms, when you look at the industry as a whole, there are very few women in leadership positions and even fewer women of color, but almost 70% of wine is purchased by women, and the industry doesn't reflect its largest customer. So I kind of had an aha moment at like right then and there and said, you know what, I know I was put on this earth to use my voice. So why not harness the power of business for good? And why not use wine as a conduit for change? And when I gave myself permission, Teneral Cellars came pouring out of me, literally in a couple of days. I hadn't given it a prior thought. And that was in about June of 2020. And we launched Teneral Cellars on October 1st, 2020 as a digitally native vertical brand that's a certified women-owned business. We sustainably farm and produce all of our wines, and we donate 10% of profits back to organizations that empower women and fight for gender and racial justice. Because when people open up a bottle of wine, I want them to open the necessary conversations, because the best conversations I've ever had, there's been a bottle or two or three or four on the table.
Absolutely.
So that's my little background story.
That is a concise one. It's really funny how change sometimes happens. Like in your case, in your story, you sat around for a good amount of time, then all of a sudden, just like that, you're able to launch everything. It was all sitting there subliminally or kind of latent, just almost like a volcano waiting to erupt.
Yeah. Well, and Bianca, that's a great transition to that. So I chose the logo and the name for very specific reasons around this story. So the dragonfly represents the transformation I want to see in the world, and it reminds us to be the light. And the word teneral is when a dragonfly comes out of its cast, it's in its most vulnerable state. Its wings are colorless. It can't fly. And within a few days, it gets its full colors in its wings, spreads its wings, and takes off with amazing power and grace, or grit and grace. And for me, that represents all women. Like, we all have that power within us. We just have to claim that power, spread our wings, and fly. And I was that vulnerable dragonfly. Like, I was stuck in this position where I was leaving the best part of myself at the door on most days. And it took the crisis of COVID and the unrest in this country for me to really have my own realization. And as you were saying, Drew, it's like this subconscious messaging that must have always been there. It was like, I gave it permission and it came out. And obviously starting a wine company is not quite as easy as that, but you have to at least have the good idea before you do that.
Absolutely. That's it. So when you were founding Teneral, I mean, everything kind of fell in line, but years of industry experience have kind of helped you navigate and do that launch. How did you go about launching this new brand? And a very kind of, I don't want to say, I mean, a politically motivated brand has its own challenges as well.
Well, it's interesting. And I do want to address that. I think by talking about, issues around elevating women and inspiring change is not political. I know our country, we have politicized everything, but fighting, for instance, women's fundamental human rights should not be a political issue.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
Fighting for, we had a Love is Love collection last year. Fighting for, all forms of love to be valued should not be a political issue, right? Celebrating the 50th anniversary of Title IX should not be a political issue. And it's always interesting when we post things, the comments, right? But I welcome that because it gives us opportunities to educate. We put a conversation starter on the back of every bottle. So when you open a bottle, you open a conversation, and then we give you, we guide you so that you could actually take tangible actions. What we call the dragonfly effect is the cumulative effect of all of us taking actions to create that transformation that we want to see. And that's our dragonfly effect. And so I don't mind pushing the envelope, because the time we live in right now actually is calling for people to be bold and courageous. And the reality is, ever since I worked at Special Olympics, and I did the second national cause marketing campaign in this country behind Feed the Children. And I did that with Special Olympics and Singular Wireless, and which was then purchased by AT&T. But I know still to this day that studies range from anywhere from 70 to like 78% of consumers expect that companies will take a stance on things that they care about, because they're not expecting our government to take a stance on those things. I mean, our government is broken. I don't care what side you're on. Our government is not serving the people that it was meant to serve. And so why not have companies, again, harness the power of business for good? And for me, why not use wine as that conduit for change?
I love that. And it's so weird how we get language stuck in our head just based on what's being pushed at us and inculcated upon us every day. And I use that word political just because that's all I hear now. It seems that every issue, if it's going to be somewhat controversial, that's the new synonym, but it's not.
Yeah. When somebody asks me, are you political? And I'm like, well, do you believe that women should be treated as equal citizens in this country is political. And then you answer the question, and then you'll answer the question that you're asking me, right? And so depending on where you are in that. But I like to look at it even as things like that, look at it as an economic issue.
Mm-hmm.
When women do better, our country does better. When our country does better, we actually are considered a stronger superpower, less threats on the country, less threats on everything. And our GDP is impacted. So I love just to open up the conversation so that we could actually begin having those things. In our current Ruthless collection, we literally have like a party kit so that you can download all of the facts around gun safety, around women's reproductive health and justice, and around voting rights. And so that you at least can have the information on the table. We could, we give those conversation starters and then invite people over, have a Ruthless party, and have the necessary conversations, because there's been so much divisiveness in this country. And again, I got into the wine industry because it connects people.
I love the fact that you're trying to actually have tangible, real conversations.
Well, that's what I was going to say.
Have a lot of that anymore. Usually,
I feel like you can't have a conversation in this anymore. I mean, people have these days, when you want to talk about the hard things, they don't want to talk. I mean, it becomes people not being friends anymore over different beliefs. And I feel like at the end of the day, we all want the same thing. But nobody wants to have that conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like we can be a great source for that because, look, I mean, let's be honest. When you drink wine, it also relaxes you a little bit. When you're relaxed, you have a tendency to be more open-minded and open up. And so why not use that opportunity? And so we're literally on a mission to reshape the wine industry so that it reflects its biggest customer, but also just to create a more equitable world for all women. And look, Drew, we need great allies. We need men to be supportive of this. And we have so many great male customers that buy corporate gifts from us, love what our message is, that have daughters and certainly don't want their daughters to grow up in a world that isn't fair and just and equal for them. And so it's just important. And this is when we were talking about like voting with your dollars. I mean, we talk about the difficult things. I also like to talk about the easy things. We can fight for all of these things, but one thing no one can take away is your ability to vote with your dollars. I mean, if women are 52% of the population, if they went out and were conscious and intentional every day about just buying products that were made by women or minority-owned businesses, we can move hundreds of millions of dollars in the economy in an instant. We have to be more conscious about that. And you were saying using that word political, it's because it's been, ingrained in us. Well, there's so many things that have been ingrained in us that we have to start questioning those things. Like, where did that belief come from that there's one job opening and women need to take each other out and fight to the death of each other and one person's going to end up standing? Women didn't come up with that. And and this idea that we shouldn't bring our heart to the table and our gut and our instinct to business decisions. Everything should be made with the head. These are old operating systems that were
truth and what's right.
Yeah. If we want a more inclusive world right now, we have to show up with our heart. Our heart is the center for all emotional connection. And and that includes negotiations. It includes creating better environments and cultures and workplaces. So, we're trying to question everything and just create a, company that's owned by women, operated by women. Every one of our vendors and suppliers are women and minority-owned businesses. Like that to me is the kind of disruptive behavior we have to have or actions to actually make a change. I don't want to be carbon neutral, so to speak, on 50%, because then we're not moving the needle anywhere.
No, it's active conversation. And I know it's focused towards women, but I see what you're doing is so much bigger. It's just actually having real conversations about issues. Like, I was a philosophy major. I thought I was going to be a professor of philosophy. I was always about truth. I was punk rock and challenged the system. But man, over the last probably 20, 30 years, I've lost that kind of drive. And it's just easier to talk about food than talk about real change.
Yeah. And I think we just have to ask ourselves where we are and even rethink what responsibility of business is, because I think it's good business to care about people, and I know we talk a lot these days about diversity, equity, and inclusion, but now they're finally starting to include the B for belonging, because you could have all the programs in the world, but if people don't feel like they belong, then it's all for naught. And so it makes it easy for me, since it's not easy changing a wine industry, but it makes it much easier for me to know that I can show up every day for the first time in many years and be in full alignment and integrity with my highest, most authentic self. So if something hard comes at me, I'm like, it's okay. Like, this is part of the journey, but I know what we're doing is so important and it needs to be done. And, it's like why I'll get in somebody's face when they're like, well, when I said, do you want to join our Swarm wine club? And they're, well, I'm already a member of 4 other clubs. And I'm, well, how many of them are women owned and run? How many of them sustainably farm and produce award-winning wines? And how many of them give back 10% of profits to organizations that empower women and fight for gender and racial justice? So if you want to truly be putting your money in places that reflect your real values, then you've got to make some different choices. So it's just bringing things to more of a more conscious place. Yeah. And I'm happy to be out in front and doing that.
Absolutely. You mentioned, I got to go back to this Ruthless Party Pack. Tell me more about that.
Yeah. So this collection is called Ruthless, and we have a Ruthless white blend and we have a I Am the Change proprietary red blend. And it sort of, the outline looks like it could be, a very famous Supreme Court justice, but it's got a mirror in it. So when you look at it, you are the change. And then we have a majority rules Petite Syrah, and it's literally the scales of justice, and half of it is women's ovaries, and the other half is the scale. And all of these have different conversation starters. And so this pack we put together, literally we will ship you some fun stuff to host a party, like coasters and stickers and a wine opener and lots of different things. But you can download the party kit that literally has all of these links to get educated on voting rights, on what is gerrymandering, when voters are restricted from showing up, all of these things. And then the other part is like gun safety, really understanding the real facts around gun safety. Because again, this is another one. People want to say it's political. That's been a marketing ploy for a long time to say, if you want gun safety, you don't believe in the Second Amendment. And most people in this country don't have an issue with the Second Amendment. People have issues with semi-automatic weapons being sold to 18-year-olds, and using them. Why? And so it's a lot of facts on that. And then the reproductive rights and justice, women's reproductive rights, just a lot of links so that you can get yourself educated. But then we give you here's some questions, here's some things to consider, here's how to have a conversation. And, easier, it's not always easy. We all know there are people in our lives that maybe don't want to have these conversations, but at least opening the conversation and making the effort to talk about these things is what's needed to bring people closer.
That's fantastic. I wish more wineries would do that. We talk to a lot that have that kind of cause-based drive behind their website, but it doesn't go much past what they give to the cause and what they put on their website, where there's not a whole lot of education. I love
the labels are so cool too.
Thank you. And thank you for that, because we actually use female artists for every different label. And that's always fun too. It's we tend to get fans, and then they're like, hey, I'm an artist, and when can I do something for you? Like the Ruthless label actually has photography in it, and it's Kristen Blush, who followed RBG, followed Hillary Clinton, and she does a lot of political photography. But it was like, how do I bring her into a label? And then we figured out with this one exactly how to do that. And so it's really fun to elevate different women and get them on, really showcase them and amplify them. And then even Emily Wines is one of my advisors and an investor in the company. She's a master sommelier. She's the current president of the Court of Master Sommeliers. And when we met, the court was going through such tumultuous times because there was
there's a gentleman with my same name that was not too good. That's caused me a lot of pain.
Oh yes, I bet. Yes. So she's
I'm commonly confused.
Yeah. Oh, well, that's too bad. You need to go. And I'm not that person. Yes.
No, I'm not that drew.com.
Yes. Oh, got it. Okay. Yeah. So she, when we first met and we were launching, the court was just going through so much transition, and she's had to take some very courageous positions to really right the ship. And these are important things. And so, I have a great advisory board. I have a younger advisory board as well of like Gen Z and Gen X, because it's important to understand who our future consumer is. And we've been a digitally native vertical brand, but we are looking for a tasting room now because we have a big enough following that I really want a place where people can come and gather, and that we could host really meaningful retreats and events. And again, use a property to open up a lot of these conversations, because I hosted my own Ruthless party for a ton of people. And it was great. Like we literally set up different parts of the room around each bottle to have conversations. But I'd love to be able to do that in a more official capacity, hopefully next year, to really bring people together.
I love the women's health collection labels too.
Yeah. So like perfect example, when women are healthy, our communities are healthy. When women are healthy, our world is healthy. There are so many discrepancies when it comes to women's health, like resources. I know we donated back to the Endometriosis Foundation of America, which is Padma Lakshmi's charity. 1 in 10 people with ovaries suffer with endometriosis, yet there is so few funding going toward that. It causes period poverty, literally where women have to miss work for days on, and it's so dangerous. Amy Schumer just had surgery within the last, I think it's 6 months now, but she was saying in recovery that there's billions of dollars going toward erectile dysfunction, and there's almost nothing going to something that impacts 1 in 10 people with ovaries in a very serious health way. And these are the discrepancies. I know at the National Institute of Health, there's not even a code to study menopause. I'm proud now to say, and I want more women my age because we're in our prime to say, look, we're in menopause. Women start perimenopause as early as 35, some even earlier. We have millions of women every day coming in and out of menopause, millions of women in menopause. We have to start speaking up about these issues and making sure that our healthcare systems, our resources, the funding, that we don't have a room full of men deciding what to do around endometriosis, which there's a famous picture about that. You know, these guys don't even know what it is. So it's just important. These are important issues for us to bring to the forefront. We still obviously have to have great wine. So really proud about our sustainable farming.
Talk to us about the juice.
Yeah. So most of the juice comes from our estate vineyards up in the wine AVA of Fairplay or El Dorado County, and just northeast of Sacramento, for some of those that don't know where that beautiful wine region is. I have sourced a few things from Monterey and a couple of Pinot grapes from Santa Lucia Highlands and Russian River Valley, but everything comes up to our winery. We produce it there. I've had several different female wine consultants. When we do move, I do want to bring on a full-time female winemaker, but I've been dabbling too over the last couple of years of really having my hands in the winemaking process. And we also use a women-owned technology called Tastery.
I'm familiar with that.
Yeah, so they've tested 248 million palates. They work with a lot of wineries, but basically then they test all of our wine. Everyone has a unique wine palate. We want to move the pretentiousness away from wine, right? So I don't care if we'll use Robert Parker because everybody knows Robert Parker. If Robert Parker says a wine's 97 points, doesn't mean my palate's going to like that. And quite frankly, I mean, his palate is so high in alcohol. It's like a lot of women's palates are not that. And so we're gathering
200 wines, you need 17% to cut.
I think but look at he changed the entire industry. Everybody moved their alcohol levels up because of him.
And everybody's very proud to talk about their Robert Parker wine scores.
Right.
I hear it all the time.
So this is a problem for new wine drinkers, though. They'll come in and then you'll give them something and they're like, and then they feel bad, right? They feel almost ashamed that, well, it's 97 points. I should love this. I want everyone to realize that, Bianca, you have a unique palate. Drew, you have a unique palate. Let's find the wines that pair perfectly with your palate. And so we use this technology to help understand what our audience likes. We help it to use it so they can get paired with the best wines. And then as we go out into wholesale, we're also going to be able to just use some good data to really create wines that will appeal to the broadest of palates as we go out into the market, because we have great labels and people love the story, but the wine has to be great. And so we want to deliver that in a way that's meaningful. And I have no issue using good data to figure out where we go in the future to really cater to our audience.
I think that's fantastic. Because when I worked in the tasting rooms for years and years, I would wait on people and they'd always just be like, kind of shy away when they were like, I like the sweet wines. And I'm like, that's fine. I'm like, everybody's palate's different. And that's the beauty of wine. There's something for everybody. You don't have to feel bad because, and I used it to my advantage and people love that. I didn't make them feel like, because I don't want that big $100 cab, then I don't drink wine properly.
Well, and the reality is it's the experience they remember more than the wine. I mean, there are people that go to a lot of wineries that don't make great wine, but they come away and they've had a great experience, and there's nothing wrong with that. So I want people not to feel intimidated. I don't want us to ever be pretentious. We have great wines, and a lot of our wines for the quality. I think our top wine right now is selling at 42. I mean, our Pinot from Russian River Valley should be in the 70s, if not higher. It's fantastic. But I don't want price to be especially online, because we're a digitally native vertical brand, sometimes they don't get to taste the wine. So that's important. But obviously when we have a tasting room, we can look at, changing the price points, or at least having some higher end, estate wines that are priced higher.
That's fantastic. I mentioned taster and the data-driven component. What's the data telling you about your wines and what you should be striving towards?
We've been actually pretty good. The stuff they've tested for us, I think there is, our audience loves sort of higher acid, the brightness of wines. We don't add any sugar or concentrate, and every one of our wines is zero residual sugar. So I know as we go in wholesale, we may need to alter that a little bit for the people that want a little fruitier wine. I think what I am also learning for wholesale is that maybe bring down the reds to a broader audience as opposed to the more sophisticated wine drinker, especially because we're not going to come out at the price point of being expensive wines on the shelf. I mean, my guess is when we go in, we'll be between 20 and 30. And so we've got to have sort of that everyday wine that majority of people enjoy. And that's still stuff we're taking a look at.
You're also discussing some pretty serious subjects. So it makes sense that your wine's going to have a little serious side to it.
Yeah. So we won't change the club wines because those are coming from the estate. And, but like we have a Vermentino. A good portion of our audience has never even tasted a Vermentino. Our 1 in 10 white blend from the Women's Health Collection is a beautiful white blend that I honestly don't think a man would have made. It's got Peak Pool, Grenache Blanc, and Muscat in it. Oh. And it is bright and crisp. But of course, when people hear Muscat, they're like, oh, it must be really sweet. I'm like, nope. So we haven't added any sugar in that. But it is, for me, that was my go-to summer porch pounder or pool pounder because it was just beautifully designed. And I love introducing that because then it's mostly, could be 2, maybe even 3 of those varietals that some people have never tasted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we were talking to Andrew Quaddy a couple months ago, and he's in the El Dorado area, and he does a dry Muscat, lower alcohol. And he says with this new craze towards the lower ABV wines, it's really seeing its heyday.
Yeah, I'm very interested in that.
I just got one in my wine club from Brooks Winery, which is in Oregon, and they were on the podcast too, and we loved it. And it was a dry Muscat. And it was incredible.
Yep. So those become a little more difficult for me to put out in the market when we don't have a tasting room, because then people can't really taste it. Like I also had, a fume that I tasted that was fantastic. I'm like, I just don't know that I can sell this digitally without people tasting it. Because first of all, they don't even know what it's supposed to taste like. And so those are somewhat interesting challenges that we have, but there's enough varietals for us to keep busy for a long time.
Let's talk about how did you get the brand out digitally?
That's what
that's one of the most difficult things for wineries to do.
Well, it's interesting. When we launched in October 2020, the first challenge we had was it was election season. So we tried to run ads in October 2020 and we couldn't get anything approved. Any word that was about social or, they had a whole list that they would say this is political. So we literally just did some virtual wine experiences, got affiliated with a couple of big women's events when sponsors sent wines to everybody. So we didn't really start pushing till January of 21. The landscape for online advertising was still perfect then. You didn't have any of the iOS privacy issues. So we were able to really go out and target our audience beautifully and lookalike audiences. And so, we broke the $1 million mark in our first full year in 21. And so there's clearly an appetite for what we're doing. We're having a lot more challenges this year with just online advertising because of can't do any attribution and it's very difficult to understand where things are coming from. So I think that still remains a big part of what we do, but we do a lot more since things have opened up. We do a lot more event marketing. I go and speak at a lot of women's events and conferences, and that helps sort of drive our audience. We do a lot of corporate wine experiences. We even do experiences around that include diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so that's a great way for us to get the brand out. JP Morgan Chase has had us on a lot of things as a small business partner. But I think that too is why we need a tasting room and why we need to go into wholesale now, just because we need to have all of those streams of revenue along with like our corporate gifting. We're a great gift that reflects your value. So we're out there, but it's definitely become more challenging on the advertising side, which has made us pivot a little more back to some of the traditional sales channels.
We've seen that in our business, or our clients have seen that. especially with digital ads. It's funny. So we got going back, not funny, that's not the right word, but going back to like that event-based marketing and kind of we had talked with Michael Houlihan from Barefoot Wines, and they really got their wines out through this worthy cause marketing in his book.
Yeah. Yep. But they also, I mean, for them, we're in a very different category from them. They have big purse behind them. And so
at the time, though, he was just trying to get his wine out. This is
that's right. Actually, in the beginning,
early, when nobody would listen to him.
Yes. When I worked at Special Olympics, they were donating some wines. And so we had some wine of their wines at our events early on.
Very type of wine, but it is a good tip that wineries can use.
Absolutely. But it's interesting too, because of a lot of, you were saying this earlier, a lot of companies, do cause marketing in the sense that they'll say, we support pride. And I realized like when we did our Love is Love collection, so all three wines won awards at the San Francisco Chronicle wine competition. I think we had a gold and 2 silvers on that. Great. We had a Barbera, overflowing with pride Barbera. We had a Loud and Proud Merlot, and we had an uprising Chenin Blanc. We partnered with the Stonewalling Gives Back initiative. So they allowed us to put the Stonewall in on the Chenin Blanc, and we had Marsha P. Johnson's crown on that. But it was interesting when we started to advertise, and we were in complete partnership with the Stonewall Inn. We literally went to New York. We filmed tons of content. But then people will go, oh, you're just rainbow washing. And it's like, I know, because there are a lot of companies that do that people get jaded, but it's like, at least look at the company before you make these kind of comments on our ads, because we're having great dialogue, and we did great content from the owners from New York when we went to visit them and put some great things out, because one of our missions was there's so many younger people, members of the LGBTQ plus community, that have no idea about the history of the Stonewall Inn.
Yeah.
Because that uprising was the catalyst for the entire global gay rights movement. And people now take for granted that people died back in the 60s so that they could love who they want to love today. And so I think getting out there and doing our event marketing is so important. We're about to drop a gift guide, because I think we have a perfect collection for everyone in your life, whether it's the feminist, whether it's the doctor, whether it's the change maker, or so. But we've got a lot of fun holiday things coming up. I was just sitting
here thinking, I need to get my sister the Ruthless pack for Christmas, because that is my sister. If you knew my sister, that's my sister.
Oh, awesome. Well, you better get it soon. We're going to be sold out of those pretty soon.
Are you? Okay. Yeah, I was sitting here like, that'd be a great Christmas present for her, because she actually has this shirt. I don't know, but it's very similar to one of the labels. And like, we were at some event and all these people kept coming up and complimenting her shirt. And she's like, they have no idea what that is. It was like men too. And she's like, they don't even know what it is, but that's fine. I don't care.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, think about when you give a gift, these gifts will absolutely open the conversation, and you can tell that there's meaning behind the gift, and it's a gift that gives back. If you're a tennis lover, we have Billie Jean King on our bottle when we're celebrating the 50th anniversary of Title IX and giving back to her Billie Jean King Leadership Initiative. I mean, this woman is literally the reason why there is equal pay in this country. And people don't realize that she's behind the scenes on so many things. She was behind the scenes on Title IX, on working with Patsy Mink, who was the author. And it's amazing to get to know the subjects of our releases too. So I was always a Billie Jean King fan, but I've learned so much more when we decided to do the release. And so I feel like I'm a better person every time we do a release. And I want to, like a dragonfly, it's like, I want to be a better version of myself today than yesterday, and a better version of myself tomorrow than today. And so that's the journey that I'm on. And I just I get to use great wine on the journey.
That's fantastic. Yeah. So as the Gen Z, millennials, Gen X, how do you see these different age? I know there's it's hard to stereotype, but the younger versus like people my age, or how's your brand resonating between these different age groups?
We've done a lot of work on that. And I think we do resonate across the board, but the reality is statistics still show that women 54 to, early 60s are still the number one consumer, and they have a lot more of disposable income. But it's important for us to engage. And if you look at our social media, I mean, we could be aspirational for someone. We could be right where they need us to be. And then we're very pleasant on the eyes too, for anyone that's looking at that. And so we constantly look at all of that, but we also look at our data, and we got to make sure that we sell wine at the end of the day. We're not going to make the kind of impact we want in the world if we're not selling wine. And so making sure that we're targeting the top performing audiences as well.
Yeah, the juice has to be good. But from what I've seen with the Gen Zs and younger, they really want to do business with wineries and businesses that actually have a soul, that have something, some substance behind them, some authenticity.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I know when we first launched Wine Enthusiast, included us in 2 articles around Gen Z and about this whole doing well by doing good. And that's important. And we want feedback from that audience as well. I know our intentions are pure. Doesn't mean we're always going to be right. We're going to make mistakes along the way. And that's just part of being a company, part of being an entrepreneur, part of being, mission driven. But we also know that we park our egos. And so if we make a mistake, we'll fix it. But we've had to make a lot of adjustments. I mean, I think when we first started, we had women with the X. So WOMXN, which was for a while the more inclusive way to say that. But then the trans community said, well, if we see ourselves as a woman, so you don't need to put the X in there. And so then we went through, we removed the X from everything. So that's okay. Like, this is feedback that we want. And we did a huge campaign when we first launched, and we actually were sharing content from one of our causes. I won't say who it is because I don't want to say this to embarrass them at all, but somebody called up and said, there's every color of woman in there, but there's no Asian women in that picture. I told the cause and they were mortified. I mean, it was an absolute honest oversight because they're so inclusive in their work, but it's like, I actually felt like by us being able to communicate that back to the cause in a nice way, we're actually helping everyone, because now we've created more awareness around, and that was during that movement too, where there's a ton of Asian hate and people are just saying, we have to be inclusive of everyone. So, but I think that's, kind of our style as a woman-owned business. If you're leading with your heart, and you have to be open to feedback and open to different ways of doing things.
Absolutely. As far as opening feedback, what advice would you give someone that wants to start a brand, a mission-driven brand such as Teneral Cellars?
Biggest piece of advice is listen to your gut, because there are plenty of people who will give you their feedback and their comments, but so often that's from whatever baggage they carry or experience that they've had. But if you're trying to do something to make a difference, you have to be true to you. Because at the end of the day, when things are challenging, if you are being true to yourself, that's what helps get you through the tough times. And it's what gives you faith to keep moving when things aren't easy or they're challenging. And I think it's so important that every decision you make, just check in with your head, your heart, and your gut. And if they're in alignment, then you know it's right. If you're using your head to talk yourself out of what your heart and your gut are saying, then you need to take a step back and look at it again, because that may just be that you were trained that way. And so I think you have to just really be true to you at the end of the day. And if it hasn't been done, so what? Maybe it's time that was done that way.
If it hasn't been done, don't ask 20 people, because you're going to get 20 different answers.
Oh, yeah. Oh, you know what? I did have some regret asking too many people for feedback on certain things, and even things that we ended up doing. And then when they were done, those same people came back and said, oh, wow, yeah, that's spot on. I was totally wrong. But at the time, I was like, oh, she doesn't like it. She thinks we're going down the wrong path. And then I started wasting time on that energy, right? And
oh my gosh, I used to do that all the time. It was like, I'd ask for this person's opinion, and then it was like all these things. And so now what I originally wanted is out the door, and I'm worried about what they're going to think and they're going to think. And it's like, the less opinions and people you talk to, it's usually better.
Yeah. Like in some of the things I was asking, I probably shouldn't have asked, because I hired experts to help work with me, like on our logo and on our branding and things like that. So I think you have to be careful when you ask for suggestions or advice. Like, be careful. You might get suggestions and advice back, and then what? So just be true to yourself. But I also think it's critically important that you surround yourself with like-minded people. The industry there are a lot of massive egos in the wine industry. And I think you have to say, who am I going to surround myself with? Who's going to be open if I want to go in this direction? And they're like, no, we've always done it this way. So I think you just have to make sure that whoever you surround yourself with, that you are compatible, that you have the same missions in mind. And it's worth doing even some personality assessments to just make sure that all of you are going to be bringing the best out of each other, because that's how you succeed, is when everybody's really working at optimal levels.
Do you have a favorite personality assessment? I
do. It's the DISC, DISC. Yeah. And it was really fascinating. It was fascinating for my team to learn that they were not surprised that I was a high D, high I. Mm-hmm. But what was not surprising, but it really answered a lot of questions, is that my driver, some high Ds, high Is, are driven by money or stuff, I'm driven by altruism. So I literally wake up in the morning and I want to make the world a better place. Doesn't mean I don't love money, but it sort of answers all the questions of how driven I am, because I wake up and I'm like, how am I going to make the world a better place today? But I also learned a lot about my team, and they learned about like how, if you come to Jill, then you need to be prepared with, if there's an issue, what's the solution you're bringing? And if you say you're going to do something and by X date, then you better do it by those dates. So the DISC assessment will go so far as to give you like the 3 do's and don'ts. There's a whole second level after you've taken the DISC assessment that you can work as a team. And that's been the most beneficial part, is how we work together and how do I get the most out of my team? How do we understand each other and really create that culture where everybody's firing on all cylinders?
Yeah, we need to move into the team version. We do use the DISC assessment for all of our hiring. So we get a little bit of a intel there, but we don't really bring it into the whole organization. So that's great.
Yeah, what's great is they'll map it. So literally you will see who's fitting where. And one of the things we realized is we had a gap. And so it also helps you so that you're not always hiring people like you or totally opposite of you, but where are the real needs? And I love that. And so there's a wonderful woman that we work with that does that for our team. And it's just invaluable stuff.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
I'm implementing that. Bianca, get ready.
I've already done the DISC assessment.
So that's going to make it easy. They'll just take the DISC assessments back. They'll plot you, and then they could do the 3 do's and don'ts for each of you. And it will be life-changing. I promise you.
That's fantastic. Jill, as we're kind of wrapping down, is there anything we haven't talked about that you'd like to bring up or?
No, look, we're a young company. We do great wine experiences. We do great corporate gifting, just great wine. And we've got our Swarm Wine Club. So I'd love everybody to just visit teneralcellars.com and just check it out. See what a mission-driven wine company looks like, and something you could be proud to support and proud to gift and really participate in, because I think we can create a best practice with enough support from our wine-loving communities and really make a difference and help elevate more women in the wine industry.
That's fantastic. Well, Jill, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Jill.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And I'm excited to see the future.
Yes.
Thank you.
Hope the future is women. Just kidding. Let's just hope the future is democratic.
Yes.
Like democracy is what I mean. That kind of democratic.
Thank you, Jill.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Legends Behind the Craft podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.